The first copy of Elena's debut novel arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, wrapped in pristine white packaging from Meridian Books. 5 years of supporting her dream had led to this moment, watching my wife become a published author. I held the book carefully, admiring the elegant cover design featuring swirling calligraphy against a watercolor background. The Heart's True Voice by Elena Thornfield. My chest swelled with pride. "Will, you're the first person to see it," Elena called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that musical quality that had captivated me when we first met. "Open it. Read the dedication." I flipped past the title page, expecting to see something about our journey together, perhaps mentioning Grace and Oliver, our children who had sacrificed their mother's attention for this literary pursuit. Instead, I found 5 words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. To M. You showed me what real love is. Without you, this story could never have been written. My hands trembled slightly as I read it again. M. Not W for Will, the husband who had worked 60-hour weeks at the literary agency while Elena crafted her novel. Not G and O for Grace and Oliver, who had eaten countless frozen dinners while their mother disappeared into her writing world. M. Elena, I called, keeping my voice steady. Who's M? She appeared in the doorway, still wearing her paint-stained writing sweater, but something flickered across her face, a micro-expression I'd learned to recognize in my work as a copyright attorney. Deception. My mother, of course, she said, but her eyes darted away. Margaret. You know how much I missed her while writing this. Margaret had died 8 years ago. Elena rarely spoke about her anymore, and when she did, it was usually with complicated feelings about their strained relationship. This dedication felt different, intimate, grateful, alive. Right, I said, closing the book. Of course. But as Elena busied herself making coffee, chattering about the book tour starting next week, I studied that dedication again. The phrasing was wrong for a dead mother. You showed me what real love is, present tense, immediate, personal. And without you, this story could never have been written, as if this mysterious M had been actively involved in the creative process. My legal training kicked in automatically. In copyright law, we always looked for collaborative evidence when authors claimed sole ownership. The dedication read like acknowledgement of substantial contribution, not mere inspiration. Over the next few days, as advance copies circulated and early reviews began appearing online, I found myself studying Elena's behavior with new attention. She checked her phone constantly, smiled at messages she didn't share, and seemed nervous about the upcoming publicity tour in ways that had nothing to do with stage fright. The Boston Globe wants to interview you about supporting a debut novelist, she mentioned Thursday evening while packing for her first tour stop. I told them you were too busy. Actually, I'd love to do that interview, I said. 5 years of investment deserve some recognition. Her face went pale. Oh, but they're really focused on the writing process, not the personal side. That night, after Elna fell asleep, I did what any intellectual property attorney would do when suspicious about authorship claims. I began investigating. Elena's laptop password was our anniversary date. She'd never hidden anything from me before. I opened her Google Drive and found the novel's drafts, dating back 18 months. The early versions were rough, tentative, lacking the philosophical depth and emotional sophistication that made the final version so compelling. But around 8 months ago, the writing transformed dramatically. Complex philosophical themes appeared, The romantic scenes gained nuance and authenticity that seemed beyond Elena's experience. Most telling were the track changes and comments, many made by someone identified as Marcus Vale. I sat back in my office chair, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Marcus Vale. M. A quick LinkedIn search revealed him immediately. Professor of philosophy at Boston University, specializing in ethics and romantic philosophy. Divorced, no children listed, academic credentials impressive enough to explain the intellectual sophistication that had suddenly appeared in Elena's writing. My hands shook as I scrolled through his faculty page. 42 years old, teaching courses on love and moral philosophy and ethics of personal relationships. His faculty photo showed a lean, intense man with graying temples and the kind of thoughtful expression that probably made graduate students swoon. I dug deeper into Elena's files. Her browser history showed dozens of visits to Marcus's university page, his published papers, his lecture schedules. Her calendar, which I'd never bothered checking before, revealed research meetings and philosophy consultations that aligned perfectly with the timeline of her novel's improvement. But it was the Dropbox folder labeled Heart Project that provided the devastating evidence. Shared between Elena and Marcus, it contained not just novel drafts, but intimate communications disguised as creative collaboration. Elena, your insights into Sarah's emotional journey ring so true, read one comment from Marcus on a romantic scene. You've captured something I've only experienced once in my own life, with you. The next file contained Elena's response. Writing about love with you has been like discovering what I've been missing all these years. Will doesn't understand the deeper philosophical questions that drive human connection. I spent the rest of the night documenting everything, my legal training overriding my emotional devastation, screenshots, file exports, communication logs, building a case as if Elena were opposing counsel in a copyright dispute. By dawn, I had assembled a comprehensive picture of an affair disguised as literary collaboration, funded by my money and resulting in a book that bore only Elena's name despite Marcus's substantial creative contributions. The irony wasn't lost on me. Elena had dedicated her novel, our novel, given my 5 years of financial support, to the man she'd been having an affair with. And thanks to my expertise in intellectual property law, I could prove that the book was actually a collaborative work that violated her publisher's sole authorship warranty. When Elena came downstairs that morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table with printed copies of the evidence spread out in chronological order. "We need to talk," I said. She saw the papers and went completely white. "Will, I can explain." "Please do," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Start with why you dedicated our book to your affair partner." Elena sat down heavily, her hands trembling. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the sympathy that had sustained our marriage through difficult times. Then I remembered that in 6 days, she would begin a 23-city book tour, giving interviews about her authentic portrayal of love and marriage while promoting a work dedicated to the man she'd been sleeping with behind my back. "It's not what you think," she began, but even she seemed to realize how ridiculous that sounded. "It's exactly what I think," I said, sliding the printed Google Docs revision history across the table. Marcus Vale appears as a collaborative editor starting 8 months ago. The same time your writing suddenly became philosophically sophisticated. The same time you started having research meetings with a professor whose expertise happens to be romantic philosophy. Elena stared at the papers, tears beginning to form. You don't understand what it's been like, Will. You're always working, always focused on other people's books. When I met Marcus at that writers' conference last year, he actually listened to my ideas. He helped me find my voice. He helped you find his voice, I corrected, pointing to sections where Marcus's academic writing style was clearly visible. Look at this paragraph about ethical frameworks in romantic relationships. That's straight from his published paper on moral philosophy, Elena. You've committed plagiarism on top of adultery. It wasn't plagiarism, she said, finally showing some fire. We collaborated. He wanted to help me succeed. Then why isn't his name on the cover? Why did you warrant to Meridian Books that you were the sole author when you clearly weren't? Elena's face crumpled. Because they wouldn't have published it as a collaborative work from an unknown novelist and a philosophy professor. Marcus understood that. Marcus understood he was helping you commit contract fraud, I said. And I understand that my wife has been having an affair for over a year while using my money to fund your creative collaboration with your lover. The word lover hung in the air between us like a physical presence. Elena winced as if I'd slapped her. How long? I asked. The affair started after the Vermont Writers' Retreat, she whispered. 14 months ago. But Will, you have to understand. No, I don't have to understand anything, I interrupted. What I have to understand is how you could dedicate a book to your affair partner when I've supported your writing dream for 5 years. How you could use my money to fund trips to meet Marcus while telling me they were research expenses. How you could commit to marketing this book as your sole creation when you know it's collaborative work. Elena was crying openly now. I never meant for it to happen. Marcus was just supposed to help with the philosophical themes, but we connected on such a deep intellectual level, and you and I had grown so distant. We grew distant because you were having an affair. I stood up, pacing to the window. And now you're about to go on a national book tour, giving interviews about authentic love and honest relationships, while promoting a work that's dedicated to the man you've been cheating with. I'll change the dedication in future printings, she said desperately. The damage is done, Elena. 10,000 copies are already in bookstores. Reviewers are calling the dedication mysteriously romantic and asking about the mysterious M who inspired such authentic emotional depth. You've humiliated me in permanent print. The full weight of what she'd done seemed to hit her then. Oh God, Will, I'm so sorry. I never thought about how it would look. You never thought about how it would look because you never thought about me at all, I said. You thought about Marcus, your philosophical connection, your artistic collaboration, your literary success. You thought about everything except the husband who made it all possible. I gathered up the evidence, stacking it neatly. I'm going to need you to postpone the book tour. What? No, Will, I can't postpone the tour. Meridian has spent thousands on promotion. This is my one chance. Your one chance built on fraud, Elena. Both marital and literary fraud. I looked at her directly. I'm a copyright attorney specializing in publishing disputes. Did you really think I wouldn't notice collaborative authorship when I saw it? Elena's face went from despair to something approaching panic. You can't do anything to hurt the book. Please, Will. This is my dream. Your dream was built on my money and another man's ideas, I said, and it's dedicated to your affair partner. I think my legal options are pretty extensive here. That afternoon, while Elena sobbed upstairs, I called my law partner Damien Sterling. Will, congratulations on Elena's book, Damien said when he picked up. I saw the early reviews. She must be thrilled. Actually, Damien, I need your advice on a complex intellectual property matter, I said. Hypothetically, if a published author warranted sole authorship to their publisher, but evidence showed substantial collaborative contribution from an undisclosed co-author, what would be the publisher's exposure? Breach of warranty, potentially. Why? Is this about one of our clients? It's about Elena. There was a long pause. Oh, Will. I'm going to need someone to represent me personally, since our firm represents authors and this involves potential action against an author. Can you recommend someone who specializes in publishing fraud? Cordelia Cross, Damien said immediately. Best intellectual property litigator in Boston. Handled that big case last year where the celebrity cookbook turned out to be ghostwritten. Will, are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next morning, I met Cordelia Cross in her downtown office. Sharp, efficient, and utterly ruthless when it came to protecting intellectual property rights, she was exactly what I needed. "Show me what you have," she said, after I'd explained the situation. I laid out the evidence. The Google Docs revision history showing Marcus as a collaborative editor, the communication logs revealing both the affair and the creative partnership, the calendar entries documenting their meetings, and the financial records showing how my money had funded Elena's research trips. Cordelia studied everything methodically, making notes. "This is excellent documentation, Will. Your wife has committed both contract fraud against her publisher and what appears to be substantial copyright infringement. The philosophical framework running through this novel, it's clearly based on Professor Vale's academic work. What are my options?" "Multiple vectors," she said, leaning back in her chair. "First, we contact Meridian Books about the warranty breach. They guaranteed their readers a work by Elena Thornfield, but they're actually selling a collaborative work with an undisclosed co-author. That's consumer fraud." "What about Marcus?" "Professor Vale contributed substantial creative content without attribution or compensation. He has copyright claims, even if he initially collaborated willingly. And given that this appears to involve misuse of his academic research, there could be university ethics violations. How do we proceed?" "Carefully and comprehensively," Cordelia said. "We document everything, then present Meridian with evidence that their star debut novel violates fundamental publishing industry standards. After that, we explore Professor Vale's university situation and potential federal issues around grant-funded research being used for personal commercial projects." The next week passed in a blur of legal preparation while Elena prepared for her book tour. She pleaded with me daily to let the matter drop, promising to end things with Marcus and dedicating herself to repairing our marriage. But every time I looked at that dedication, to M, you showed me what real love is. My resolve hardened. The book tour began on a Wednesday in Philadelphia. Elena's first interview was with NPR's Fresh Air, where she discussed the authentic emotional journey of writing about love and relationships. When the host asked about the mysterious dedication, Elena's voice became strained. "M represents someone who helped me understand what genuine connection looks like," she said. "Sometimes we need outside perspective to see our own hearts clearly." I listened to the interview from my office, surrounded by legal documents that would soon make Elena's words seem like a cruel joke. That same day, Cordelia delivered our evidence package to Meridian Books' legal department. The response was immediate and dramatic. "They're stopping the presses," Cordelia called to tell me. "All shipping has been suspended pending review. Their legal team wants to meet tomorrow." The meeting with Meridian's executives was devastating for Elena's career prospects. Present were the publisher, the editor, the marketing director, and two attorneys. I attended as Cordelia's client, presenting evidence that one of their biggest spring releases was built on fraud. The Google Docs revision history is conclusive, Cordelia explained, projecting the evidence on the conference room screen. Marcus Vail appears as a collaborative editor with substantial creative input. His philosophical framework runs throughout the novel. Ms. Thornfield's warranty of sole authorship is clearly false. The publisher, Maximilian Stone, looked physically ill. How do we proceed? We've got 22 more tour dates scheduled, thousands of books in stores, and early orders for a second printing. You have several options, Cordelia said. Recall and reprint with correct co-authorship attribution, settle potential consumer fraud claims, or face litigation from both deceived readers and Professor Vail for unauthorized use of his intellectual property. What does Professor Vail want? Asked one of the attorneys. We haven't contacted him yet, I said. But given that his university research appears to have been appropriated for a commercial project, he may have significant claims. By the end of the meeting, Meridian had agreed to suspend Elena's book tour and halt all promotional activities pending resolution of the authorship issues. Elena's publishing dream was effectively dead, killed by her own deception. Elena called me from her hotel in Philadelphia, hysterical. They canceled everything, Will. The whole tour, the interviews, everything. Meridian says they can't promote the book until the authorship issues are resolved. You've destroyed my career. You destroyed your career when you committed fraud, I said calmly. And you destroyed our marriage when you dedicated the result to your affair partner. Please, Will. I'll do anything. I'll divorce Marcus. I'll publicly apologize. I'll sign over all the royalties to you. Just let me keep my book. It's not your book, Elena. That's the whole point. The next phase of our legal campaign focused on Marcus Vail himself. Cordelia hired a private investigator named Sable Raven, who specialized in academic fraud cases. Professor Vail has been using university resources for personal projects, Sable reported after a week of investigation. His office computer shows extensive work on the novel during university time. His NSF research grant funded philosophical research that appears to have been incorporated into the commercial work without disclosure. NSF? I asked. National Science Foundation. Vail received a $50,000 grant for research into ethical frameworks in romantic relationships. Reading his grant application alongside the novel, there's substantial overlap in philosophical content. That's federal grant fraud, Cordelia noted. We need to be very careful about how we proceed with that information. Meanwhile, I contacted Dr. Helena Nash, a forensic document analyst who specialized in authorship verification. Her analysis of the novel's drafts was damning. The stylistic analysis is clear, Dr. Nash explained in her report. The philosophical sections show distinct linguistic patterns consistent with academic writing, specifically Professor Vail's published papers. There's also evidence of temporal composition. The intellectual framework was developed first, then the narrative elements were built around it. This suggests the philosophical content was the primary contribution, with the story serving as illustration. What does that mean for authorship claims? I asked. In copyright law, this would typically qualify as joint authorship. Professor Vail's philosophical framework isn't just inspiration, it's integral structural content that's protectable intellectual property. Armed with this evidence, Cordelia contacted Boston University's ethics department. The response was swift and severe. The university is initiating a formal investigation, Cordelia reported. Using grant-funded research for undisclosed commercial projects violates both federal regulations and university policy. Professor Vale's department chair seemed genuinely shocked. The investigation moved quickly. Marcus was suspended from teaching pending review, his research privileges were revoked, and the university began its own examination of potential grant fraud. Elena, meanwhile, had returned home from her canceled book tour and was spiraling into depression. She'd stopped showering regularly, barely spoke to Grace and Oliver, and spent most of her time staring at her phone, presumably communicating with Marcus. "Mom's really sick," Grace said to me one evening. At 16, she was old enough to understand that something serious was happening. "Is she going to be okay?" "We're working through some difficult problems," I said carefully. "But whatever happens between your mother and me, you and Oliver are our priority." "Is it about her book?" Oliver asked. At 13, he was intuitive enough to connect Elena's depression with the sudden end of her publicity tour. "Partly," I admitted. "There are some legal issues that need to be resolved." What I didn't tell them was that their mother's book was about to become the center of a federal investigation. 2 weeks after our initial contact with Boston University, federal agents from the NSF Office of Inspector General arrived to interview Marcus about potential grant fraud. Using federally funded research for undisclosed commercial purposes was a serious violation that could result in criminal charges. "They're treating this as potential wire fraud," Cordelia explained. Vale submitted electronic reports claiming his research was purely academic while using it for a commercial book project. The emails between him and Elena discussing monetizing his philosophical work could constitute fraudulent wire communications. The pressure on Marcus intensified when his wife, Dr. Rebecca Vale, learned about the affair. Rebecca, a psychology professor at a different university, immediately filed for divorce and hired her own attorney to explore Marcus's financial misconduct. Dr. Rebecca Vale wants to know if Professor Vale received any payments for his collaborative work, Rebecca's attorney called to ask Cordelia. She's concerned about hidden assets in their divorce proceedings. This opened another avenue of investigation. Elena had claimed Marcus's help was purely academic, but her financial records showed several cash payments to him disguised as research consulting fees, payments that should have been reported as taxable income. The IRS became interested when Rebecca's divorce attorney reported the unreported income. Suddenly, Marcus faced potential tax evasion charges on top of grant fraud and university ethics violations. "The federal investigation is expanding," Cordelia updated me. Vale could face criminal charges for grant fraud, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Elena could be charged as a co-conspirator for the tax issues. Elena panicked when she learned about the potential criminal exposure. "Will, please. I'll sign a statement admitting everything. I'll testify against Marcus if necessary. Just don't let them prosecute me." "That's not up to me anymore, Elena. You committed federal crimes." "I didn't know they were crimes." "You knew you were lying to Meridian about sole authorship. You knew you were claiming tax deductions for personal affair expenses. You knew Marcus was using university resources to help with your book. Ignorance isn't a defense." The legal net continued tightening around both Elena and Marcus. The university completed its investigation first, finding that Marcus had violated research ethics, misused federal grant money, and engaged in conduct detrimental to the university's reputation. Professor Vale's tenure has been revoked, the university's council informed Cordelia. He's been terminated for cause and will be ineligible for employment at any institution receiving federal education funding. Marcus's academic career was over. A philosophy professor who'd built his reputation on ethics had been destroyed by his own ethical failures. Elena's situation was equally dire. Meridian Books formally demanded restitution under the warranty and indemnity clauses of her publishing contract. They'd lost hundreds of thousands of dollars on promotion, printing, and distribution of a fraudulent work. They want $400,000 in damages, Cordelia reported, plus legal fees and the cost of recall and destruction of existing inventory. Does Elena have that kind of money? Not even close. But the house has equity, and there are retirement accounts, plus potential garnishment of any future earnings. The irony was devastating. Elena had destroyed our marriage and her career for a book that was now costing us our financial future. The federal investigation concluded with mixed results for criminal prosecution. While Marcus's grant fraud was clear, federal prosecutors decided the amounts involved were too small for criminal charges. Instead, he faced civil penalties and restitution requirements totaling $75,000. Elena avoided criminal prosecution entirely, but faced substantial civil liability for tax fraud and contract violations. The government is treating this primarily as an academic ethics matter rather than a criminal conspiracy, Cordelia explained. But the civil consequences are severe enough to accomplish our goals. 6 months after discovering Elena's affair, the complete destruction of both Elena's and Marcus's careers was nearly complete. Elena's book had been recalled and destroyed, costing Meridian over $600,000 that they were seeking to recover from her. Marcus had lost his tenure, his teaching career, and faced federal restitution requirements that would bankrupt him. But the personal dimension remained unresolved. "I want a divorce," I told Elena on a cold October morning, "and I want primary custody of Grace and Oliver." "Will, please. I know I made terrible mistakes, but we can work through this. I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes. You dedicated our book to your affair partner, Elena. You publicly humiliated me while using my money to fund your deception. There's no working through that." The divorce proceedings were surprisingly smooth, mainly because Elena had no leverage. Her affair was documented, her financial misconduct was proven, and her contribution to our family's financial destruction was undeniable. Grace and Oliver, when asked by the family court counselor about their preferences, both chose to live primarily with me. "Mom's been really unstable," Grace explained to the counselor. "Dad's the one who's been taking care of us through all this." "I want to stay with Dad," Oliver said simply. "Mom seems sad all the time now." Elena was granted supervised visitation rights and ordered to pay child support once she found employment, a challenge given that she was effectively blacklisted from the publishing industry. The final phase of our legal campaign focused on recovering damages and establishing precedents that would prevent similar fraud in the future. Marcus, represented by Rebecca's divorce attorney, filed copyright infringement claims against Elena for unauthorized use of his philosophical work. Despite their affair, he was entitled to compensation for his intellectual property contributions. Professor Vale is seeking $800,000 in damages for unauthorized use of his philosophical framework, the attorney informed us. He's also requesting injunctive relief preventing any further distribution of the work without proper co-authorship attribution. "Let them fight over the scraps," I told Cordelia. I want to focus on the consumer protection claims against Meridian. We filed suit against Meridian Books under Massachusetts consumer protection laws, arguing that their marketing of Elena's book as the sole work of one author constituted deceptive business practices that harmed both readers and the literary community. Publishing houses need to verify authorship claims more carefully, Cordelia argued in our complaint. The industry's reliance on author warranties isn't sufficient when collaborative fraud is this sophisticated. The case attracted attention from literary industry publications and academic journals examining authorship fraud. Several prominent authors filed amicus briefs supporting our position that publishers had a duty to verify sole authorship claims. 18 months after discovering Elena's dedication to Marcus, our legal campaign achieved complete victory across multiple fronts. Marcus settled his copyright claims against Elena for $850,000. Money Elena didn't have but would be garnishing her wages for decades. He was also awarded co-authorship credit in any future editions of the work, though no publisher would touch the project. Meridian Books settled our consumer protection claims for $300,000 and agreed to implement enhanced authorship verification procedures for all future publications. Elena was ordered to pay Meridian $400,000 in contract damages, plus legal fees totaling another $120,000. The federal government imposed $75,000 in civil penalties on Marcus for grant fraud, effectively ending any possibility of future academic employment. Both Elena and Marcus faced additional tax penalties and interest totaling over $100,000 for unreported collaborative income and fraudulent deductions. Total financial liability across all parties exceeds $2 million, Cordelia summarized. Neither Elena nor Marcus will recover financially from this for decades, if ever. But the professional destruction was even more complete than the financial ruin. Elena was unemployable in publishing. Every literary agency, magazine, and publishing house in the industry knew about the authorship fraud. She eventually found work as a cashier at a suburban grocery store, earning minimum wage while garnishments took most of her paycheck. Marcus faced similar professional exile. No university would hire a philosophy professor terminated for ethics violations involving grant fraud and research misconduct. He ended up teaching basic composition at a community college for a fraction of his former salary. They're both completely destroyed professionally, Damien observed during one of our partnership meetings. Elena will never publish again, and Marcus will never work at a real university again. Good, I said simply. My own career, meanwhile, had flourished beyond anything I'd previously imagined. My principled handling of the crisis, combined with my expertise in publishing law, had made me a sought-after authority on literary ethics and intellectual property protection. Williams and Sterling Literary Agency became the most respected boutique firm in Boston, known for our absolute commitment to author integrity and transparent representation. Authors competed to work with us because they knew we would protect their work from collaborative fraud and ensure proper attribution. I was elected to the board of the Association of Authors Representatives and became a frequent speaker at publishing industry conferences about authentication and ethics standards. Will Thornfield has single-handedly transformed industry standards around collaborative disclosure, wrote Publishers Weekly in a profile piece. His fight against authorship fraud has made publishing more honest and transparent. Universities began hiring me as a consultant on intellectual property policies and academic ethics. Law schools invited me to speak about the intersection of family law, intellectual property, and professional responsibility. The personal recovery took longer but was ultimately more rewarding than the professional success. Grace and Oliver adapted well to our new life. The financial settlements from various lawsuits had actually improved our economic situation, and they seemed more stable with Elena out of the daily picture. "Dad, you seem happier now," Grace observed one evening while we worked on her college application essays. "Even with all the legal stuff, you're more relaxed than you were before." She was right. The constant stress of Elena's deception, the subconscious awareness that something was wrong in our marriage, had lifted. I slept better, worked more efficiently, and enjoyed my children's company without the underlying tension that had characterized our family life. I also began dating again, carefully and selectively. The woman who eventually captured my attention was Dr. Helena Nash, the forensic document analyst who had helped expose Elena's fraud. "I admire how you handled an impossible situation with such integrity," Helena said during our first dinner together. "Most people would have either ignored the problem or handled it vindictively. You managed to be both principled and effective." Helena understood the intellectual property world, appreciated the ethical dimensions of my work, and brought her own expertise to our discussions about authorship and authenticity. Unlike Elena, she valued truth over convenience, accuracy over expedience. "Real love requires honesty," Helena said one evening as we discussed the future. "What Elena did to you wasn't just adultery. It was a fundamental betrayal of trust about who she really was." 2 years after the publication of The Heart's True Voice, Helena and I were married in a small ceremony attended by Grace, Oliver, close friends, and several prominent authors who had become clients of our agency. Elena was not invited, obviously. She was still working at the grocery store, still paying garnishments, still excluded from any literary community involvement. Marcus had disappeared into community college obscurity, teaching freshman composition to disinterested students who had no idea their instructor had once been a respected philosopher. "Do you ever feel sorry for them?" Helena asked me on our honeymoon. "No," I said honestly. "They made choices that destroyed other people's lives for their own gratification. They're experiencing the natural consequences of those choices." What if Elena had just been honest from the beginning? What if she'd admitted Marcus was collaborating and proposed a co-authored work? I considered this. Then none of this would have happened. Meridian might have published a collaborative work, or they might have passed, but Elena would still have her integrity, and our marriage might have survived. Do you think the affair would have happened if she'd been honest about the collaboration? The affair caused the collaboration, not the other way around. Elena didn't fall in love with Marcus because he helped with her book. She started collaborating with him because she'd already decided to have an affair. And the dedication? The dedication was just the most visible symptom of her complete disregard for my feelings and our marriage. She was so caught up in her romantic fantasy with Marcus that she didn't even consider how it would feel for me to read a public tribute to her affair partner in a book I'd supported for 5 years. 5 years after Elena's publication and destruction, my life had stabilized into something far better than our previous marriage had offered. Williams and Sterling Literary Agency was now one of the most successful boutique firms in New England, representing authors who valued our commitment to transparency and ethical representation. Our client list included several New York Times best-selling authors who had specifically sought us out because of our reputation for integrity. Grace had graduated from high school as valedictorian and was attending Harvard on a merit scholarship, majoring in English literature with plans for law school. "I want to be like you, Dad," she'd said during her senior year. protecting people's creative work and making sure the industry stays honest. Oliver was thriving as a sophomore in high school, captain of the debate team and editor of the school literary magazine. Both children had remained remarkably well-adjusted despite their mother's disgrace and virtual absence from their lives. Helena and I had bought a house in Cambridge, close to Harvard, where she'd accepted a position developing new authentication technologies for digital manuscripts. Our marriage was built on shared professional interests, mutual respect, and complete honesty. Everything my marriage to Elena had lacked. The literary world is more honest now because of what you exposed, Helena said one evening as we reviewed articles about new industry authentication standards that had emerged from our case. She was right. Publishers now required verification of sole authorship claims, collaborative disclosure was standard practice, and academic institutions had strengthened their policies around research misuse. The case had become a standard example in intellectual property law courses and publishing ethics seminars. Elena and Marcus's fraud made the entire industry more transparent, I agreed. Their destruction created something positive for everyone else. Elena occasionally attempted to contact me, usually around holidays or the children's birthdays. Her letters were pathetic attempts to rebuild some connection, filled with apologies and promises of change. "I think about what we had every day," she wrote in one particularly desperate communication. "I know I destroyed everything, but I still love you and miss our family. Maybe someday you can forgive me." I never responded. There was nothing to forgive because there was nothing to restore. Elena had made her choices, and those choices had revealed who she really was underneath the supportive wife persona she'd maintained for years. Marcus had attempted once to contact me through an intermediary, suggesting that we'd both been victims of Elena's manipulation. I'd instructed Cordelia to inform him that any further communication would result in harassment charges. "He's trying to rewrite history," Cordelia explained, claiming Elena seduced him and that he didn't understand the legal implications of their collaboration. "He's a philosophy professor who specialized in ethics," I'd replied. "He understood exactly what he was doing." The truth was that both Elena and Marcus had made calculated decisions to prioritize their own desires over everyone else's well-being. Elena had chosen affair and literary success over marriage and family integrity. Marcus had chosen romantic adventure and creative collaboration over professional ethics and academic responsibility. They were both paying the price for those choices and would continue paying for the rest of their lives. Grace's Harvard graduation was a moment of perfect vindication. As I watched her receive her diploma summa cum laude, I thought about how different her trajectory might have been if Elena's deception had succeeded. "I'm proud of the family we built after everything fell apart," Grace said at her graduation dinner. "You showed Oliver and me what it means to have principles and stick to them no matter what." "I'm proud of both of you for thriving despite difficult circumstances," I replied. "You could have been derailed by your mother's choices, but you stayed focused on your own integrity." Oliver nodded seriously. "We learned from watching you handle everything. You never compromised your values, even when it would have been easier." Helena smiled at all of us. "You built something stronger from the pieces Elena left behind." The next month brought news that Elena had been fired from her grocery store job for theft. Apparently, she'd been taking money from the register to pay for basic necessities, as her garnishments left her unable to cover rent and food. "She's facing criminal charges," Damien reported when he saw the news item. "Petty theft, but given her existing legal problems, she could face jail time." I felt no satisfaction in Elena's continued downfall. At some point, destruction becomes redundant. She'd already lost everything that mattered: career, family, financial security, professional respect, personal relationships. Criminal charges for grocery store theft were just additional confirmation of how completely her life had unraveled. Marcus, meanwhile, had been discovered by community college administrators to be falsifying his credentials on employment applications. Trying to hide his ethics violations and tenure revocation from potential employers, he'd been caught lying about his academic standing and was fired from his composition teaching position. He's unemployable even at the community college level now, Sable Raven reported during one of her periodic updates. No educational institution will hire someone terminated for credential fraud on top of research misconduct. Both Elena and Marcus had become cautionary tales in their respective fields, Elena in publishing, Marcus in academia. Professional organizations use their cases as examples of how personal choices could destroy careers, and why ethical standards existed to protect both institutions and individuals. 10 years after discovering Elena's dedication to Marcus, I could honestly say that my life was immeasurably better than it had been during our marriage. Professional success, personal happiness, children who respected me, a wife who shared my values, everything Elena had prevented through her deception and betrayal. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd never discovered the truth? Helena asked me one evening as we sat in our study, both working on manuscripts from our respective clients. Every day would have been built on a lie, I said. Elena would have continued the affair, probably gotten more careless about hiding it. Marcus would have continued using our marriage as cover for his unethical behavior. Eventually, the truth would have come out in a way that was even more destructive. And the book? The book would have been her springboard to bigger lies, more collaborative fraud, more affairs disguised as creative partnerships, more public humiliation disguised as artistic inspiration. I'm glad you found out when you did, Helena said, and I'm glad you handled it the way you did. The legal system worked exactly as it should, I replied. Elena committed fraud, Marcus violated professional ethics, and they both faced appropriate consequences. Justice doesn't require forgiveness or mercy. It requires accountability. The final vindication came 15 years after Elena's publication, when Grace graduated from Harvard Law School and joined our firm as an associate, specializing in intellectual property and publishing law. I want to continue the work you started, Dad, she said during her first week at Williams & Sterling. Protecting authors from collaboration fraud and making sure the industry maintains ethical standards. Oliver had chosen a different path, becoming an investigative journalist focusing on academic fraud and research misconduct. His first major article, published in The Atlantic, examined how institutional failures to police academic ethics enabled the kind of misconduct Marcus had committed. Professor Vale's case represents a systemic problem in academic oversight, Oliver wrote. Universities must take stronger action to prevent research misuse and collaborative fraud before they damage both individuals and institutions. Both of my children had built careers around the principles they'd learned from watching me handle Elena's betrayal: integrity, accountability, and the importance of ethical standards in professional life. Elena, meanwhile, had served 6 months in jail for the grocery store theft and was now working part-time at a fast food restaurant while living in subsidized housing. Her garnishments would continue for another decade, ensuring that she would never achieve financial stability. Marcus had disappeared entirely from public view after being fired from the community college. According to Sable's periodic reports, he was working as a security guard and living alone in a studio apartment, completely cut off from academic or literary communities. They're both effectively erased, Helena observed during a recent discussion about the case. Not just punished, completely removed from the worlds they cared about. That's what happens when you violate the fundamental principles of your profession, I said. Elena can never be trusted with creative work again. Marcus can never be trusted with academic responsibility again. They destroyed their own credibility. Do you think they understand what they lost? I think they understand that their choices had consequences. Whether they understand the full scope of what they destroyed, both personally and professionally, I don't know. And I don't care. Recently, Grace discovered a copy of The Heart's True Voice in a used bookstore, marked down to 50 cents. She bought it and brought it to the office. It's weird reading this now, she said, flipping through the pages. Knowing everything that went into it, the affair, the collaboration, the lies. What do you think of the writing? I asked. It's not bad, actually. The philosophical framework is sophisticated, and the emotional development is authentic. But knowing that Elena was writing from direct experience of betraying her family makes it feel manipulative. The technical quality was never the issue, I said. The fraud was the issue. Grace turned to the dedication page and read aloud. To M, you showed me what real love is. Without you, this story could never have been written. She was right about one thing, Grace said. Without Marcus, this story couldn't have been written. But she should have admitted that instead of trying to take credit for his intellectual contributions. And she never should have dedicated a book I supported to the man she was having an affair with, I added. Grace closed the book and tossed it into the office recycling bin. Some mistakes can't be undone. No, I agreed. They can't. But they can be learned from. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing manuscripts from prospective clients while Helena worked on authentication technologies that would make future fraud even more difficult to commit and conceal. Our house was quiet, comfortable, and built on honest relationships. Grace was in her second year at our firm, establishing herself as a formidable advocate for author rights. Oliver was working on a book about academic integrity that would likely become a standard text in graduate programs. Outside, Boston's literary community continued to thrive under enhanced ethical standards that had emerged from Elena's destruction. Authors collaborated openly and honestly. Publishers verified authorship claims more carefully, and academic institutions monitored research use more effectively. Elena's book had been completely erased from literary history. No copies remained in print. No academic studies referenced it. No readers recommended it. She had achieved the opposite of immortality, complete literary obliteration. Marcus's academic work faced similar erasure. Philosophy journals had quietly removed his papers from consideration. Universities had struck his name from research citations, and his contributions to romantic philosophy were being systematically ignored by scholars unwilling to associate with research misconduct. They had both bet everything on a deceptive collaboration that promised to elevate their careers and personal happiness. Instead, they had destroyed both while creating stronger ethical standards that protected everyone else from similar fraud. Real love requires truth, Helena had said during our courtship. Real art requires authentic creation. Elena and Marcus had chosen deception over truth, collaboration fraud over authentic creation, immediate gratification over long-term integrity. They were living with the permanent consequences of those choices. I, meanwhile, was living with the permanent benefits of choosing truth over convenience, principle over profit, accountability over forgiveness. My life was immeasurably better than it had been during my marriage to Elena, and my children had learned lessons about integrity that would serve them throughout their lives. The dedicated heart, it turned out, wasn't the one Elena had written about in her fraudulent novel. It was the heart committed to truth, ethics, and authentic relationships. The heart that chose justice over mercy when mercy would only enable more deception. Elena had dedicated her book to Marcus because he had shown her what she thought was real love. But real love doesn't require betrayal, deception, or the destruction of innocent people's lives. Real love builds honestly, creates authentically, and takes responsibility for its consequences. I had learned what real love actually was, not from Elena's affair or Marcus's philosophy, but from Helena's honesty, grace, and Oliver's respect, and the literary community's appreciation for principled action in defense of ethical standards. Elena's dedication had ultimately been prophetic, just not in the way she'd intended. Marcus had indeed shown her what love was, the kind of selfish, destructive love that ruins everything it touches. And without him, her story truly could never have been written, because it was a story about betrayal, fraud, and the complete destruction of integrity. My story, meanwhile, was about recovery, justice, and the construction of something better from the ruins of deception. It was a story Elena would never be able to write because she had never learned the difference between authentic creation and collaborative fraud. 10,000 copies of The Heart's True Voice had been printed with Elena's dedication to Marcus. All 10,000 had been recalled and destroyed, turned into recycled paper that would become the foundation for honest books written by authentic authors. The dedication that had revealed Elena's betrayal was gone forever, but its consequences would last for the rest of her life. She had achieved exactly what she'd set out to achieve, a permanent record of what she thought was real love. She just hadn't understood that real love doesn't destroy families, violate professional ethics, or require the humiliation of innocent spouses. Real love builds, protects, and takes responsibility for its impact on others. Elena had dedicated her heart to the wrong person for the wrong reasons. I had dedicated mine to truth, justice, and authentic relationships. 20 years later, the results spoke for themselves.